call. Please hang up and try again.
Jeffrey and Marci Beagley are being tried for criminally negligent homicide in the death of their teenage son, Neil. Neil, 16, died in June 2008 of complications involved with a urinary tract obstruction. Doctors testified that the condition was treatable. However, Neil's parents are members of the sect Followers of Christ Church, whose members reject medical treatment in favour of faith healing.
It's Lieutenant Band, Jim Band.
And Lieutenant Band, who do you work for?
I work for the Oregon City Police Department.
And what's your job responsibility there?
I'm the operations lieutenant, which essentially means that everything in a uniform is my responsibility.
How big of a department is Oregon City Police Department?
About 40 sworn officers.
Okay. How long have you been doing that?
That particular job for almost a year.
Back in June of 2008, what was your job responsibility at that point in time?
I was the detective sergeant for the same police department.
And can you explain to the jurors what that responsibility is?
That is, we have 4 detectives in that division, and so I carried a small caseload. The main part of my responsibility was overseeing the detective unit, what cases they were assigned, what cases we were and were not going to be investigated, reviewing their cases once they were completed, and then also being a member of the Clackamas County Major Crimes Team.
What other experience did you have as a police officer in Oregon City?
Okay. I've been there for about 10 years and done just about everything there, from being a patrolman, police officer, in a marked unit, answering 911 calls and investigating crimes on the street, to being a detective for a while, where I was assigned to the detective unit obviously as a detective, investigating crimes of all types, some property crimes, mostly person crimes, everything from investigating burglaries to homicides, officer-involved shootings. I've worked a lot of child abuse cases, so I've worked just about the gamut of what you can do as a detective. Then I was promoted to sergeant, where I went back out into uniform, where I supervised a patrol shift, uniform shift, out on the street, taking calls and going to calls with people that I was responsible for, and then into the detective sergeant role, which we obviously already talked about.
You mentioned that they're called out to major crimes. Does that include any kind of a situation in which there's what believed to be or investigated as a homicide?
Yes.
Is that standard then?
Yes, that's standard.
And what about when there's a child involved? Is it standard that if a child dies and it's unattended, in other words, there's not medical involvement or a medical doctor that's particularly involved, before even the cause of death is known, is that standard that there would be a response of the major crimes team to do or begin an assessment and in fact do a criminal investigation, potentially a criminal investigation?
Yes, not standard in the term that every single time there is, say, a SIDS death, you're going to have a major crimes call out. But normally you're going to have several people, and most smaller agencies inside of Clackamas County, basically anybody other than the sheriff's office, if they have a more complex incident like that, you're going to have it's almost standard that you're going to have major crimes team involvement.
Can you explain to the jurors a little bit, as you start describing the inside of the house, can you give a little bit of an idea? I mean, the floor plan isn't necessarily important, but can you describe a little bit about what it was like and what was going on there?
Sure. I don't know the square footage, but it is a smaller house. It's an older house. And you walked in, and there's a living room, not very big, but there's a lot of people sitting there. There's a kitchen right past it where there's a spread of all kinds of food. I mean, it looks like a place where people have been gathered, and there are a bunch of people gathered there. There's another, behind that, there's kind of a second living room, a lot of people in that living room. And then, like I said, there were a bunch of people outside, lots and lots of cars parked in front of the house, around the house. As you walk in, like I'd mentioned, to a living room that you make a left-hand turn, there's a hallway. The first door, if I remember right, on your right is a pretty small bathroom. The next door, as you're going down the hallway on the right, is a small bedroom, and that's where the interview of Marci Beagley took place, and then later my interview with Jeff took place. On the left-hand side, down that same hallway, is a room that's maybe a little bit bigger than that other bedroom, which is what I understand is the master bedroom of the house. And that is where there's a bed, and that is where Neil Beagley was lying deceased in the bed.
Can you describe what generally what the circumstances were?
Well, obviously, I know at this point that Jeff and Marci are the parents of a 16-year-old boy who's died. You can't quite imagine what it's like to go into somebody's home in what is a pretty personal, private moment. But we've got a job to do. I've got to be there. So I want to just pull, at this point, my intention is just to pull Mr. Beagley aside, kind of explain to him, this is why there's a bunch of cops here, this is why they're everywhere, this is what we're doing, how are you doing?
Now, before you go on, you said there's a bunch of cops. You also said there were 100 people there. Were those 100 police officers that were there?
No.
Who were the 100 people?
My understanding, just from experiences, they were members. They're members of the Followers of Christ Church. And then he said recently Neil had complained of troubles breathing, but said that 3 months prior, when Neil was sick, that there weren't any troubles breathing then. I asked Mr. Beagley if Neil had seen a doctor, and he told me no. He said that Neil did not want to go to the doctor. So Neil had at some point gotten sick enough back in March that they had taken him from their house in Oregon City to the grandmother's house in the same house that we were in Gladstone. Mm-hmm. And the reason was because he said he just was not feeling well at the time. He said that at that time, Neil had gotten very ill and that they had called for members of their church to come over and pray over Neil, hoping that he would get better. He said that they called and had members of the church come lay hands on Neil, and he said that's what people at their church do when they get really sick.
Did he say, just in terms of context, did he say that Neil had gotten very ill, or just sick, or he wasn't feeling well, or did he emphasize that he was very ill?
Well, he really kind of said both. I asked for symptoms, and he said, well, he wasn't feeling well. Then he talked about the fact that they came over and laid hands on him and said, that's what we do at our church when people are very ill. So he didn't... And that was something throughout the interview that as I talk about some other things, that was kind of a theme was on one hand, Mr. Beagley would talk about symptoms that seemed fairly benign, but then at other times talk about symptoms that were pretty serious.
Did you ask him a little bit more background in terms of medications, or whether they would take medications, a little bit more about the context of the religious response to illness?
Yes. He said that Neil had not taken any medication. He said that they did give him a little bit of wine. He said it was part of their religion to give sick people a small amount of wine to make them feel better. He told me that wine makes you feel better, makes your stomach feel better.
So that's part of the faith healing?
Yes. Detective McKean, who I've mentioned, was sitting next to me, asked Mr. Beagley if he had done CPR on his son. So he stops breathing. He asked him, did you do any CPR at that point? And Mr. Beagley said no. Detective McKean asked Mr. Beagley if he had called 911, and he said no.
My name is James Rhodes, R-H-O-D-E-S, Rhodes.
Mr. Rhodes, how are you employed?
I am employed currently as a patrol sergeant for the Clackamas County Sheriff's Department.
Okay, and tell us a little bit about your duties as a patrol sergeant.
As a patrol sergeant, I supervise a squad of deputies, a shift of deputies that span the entirety of Clackamas County during regular patrol operations. I was a narcotics investigator. I was a detective. While a detective, I worked in the child abuse team. I worked as a homicide and violent crime unit detective and a robbery detective.
Okay, and then subsequently to that, you were promoted to patrol sergeant, is that correct?
Yes.
And when did that occur?
I was promoted to sergeant in August of last year.
Okay. So in 2008, what was your specific assignment with the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office?
In 2008, I was a detective assigned to the child abuse team, child physical abuse and criminal neglect. I was responsible for being the case agent and lead investigator for those types of cases. I carried my own caseload and led the investigation of those type of cases from conclusion until trial.
Describe the scene, if you would, of the residents at around 8:15, 8:30 p.m.
There was a lot of people. They had to park several blocks away. The roads were choked with cars. When I got there, the house, from the outside, I could see the house was full of people, and there were people in the yard, mostly the back and side yard. I would guess there were probably 75 people or so outside, and another 30 or 40 perhaps inside the house. We briefed in the street, since our assignment, if you will, was to go locate and interview Marci Beagley. We went in the house, entered through the front door. It was crowded with people. We, as polite as we could, made our way through the house asking for Marci Beagley. We were eventually told that she was outside. We went, I think, through the kitchen and out a side door to the side yard where there was more people standing around, where someone pointed us to where Mrs. Beagley was. We introduced ourselves and offered our condolences, explained who we were, and that we'd like the opportunity to talk with Mrs. Beagley. We offered, if she'd like to talk inside in a more private atmosphere, and she agreed. So she led us back into the house, the way we come, down a hallway to what I think is a guest room. It's appeared to be a small bedroom, I think maybe a guest bedroom, in the back corner of the house, and we sat in there to conduct our interview.
I believe, I'm not sure if it started with the sore throat, but at some point there he had a sore throat.
Were you able to look with a flashlight down his throat? Do you ever do that to see if?
I didn't,
okay.
that I recall.
Okay, so his sore throat was just verbally from him that he had a sore throat. Could you tell that he had a sore throat? Was it difficult for him to talk? Did he have laryngitis? So if he hadn't told you he had a sore throat, you wouldn't have known that? Is that fair to say?
Well, he told us, so I'm not sure.
Okay, so he told you he had a sore throat. I guess the point I'm just trying to see if objectively there were any symptoms of his sore throat other than his complaints.
Yeah, well, I believe he had congestion and he got sick. I mean, he just got sick. And
what specifically did you ask?
I asked him I told him he always had the option to, if he chose so, to go to a doctor or a hospital, and that we would stand by him regardless. And he said he wanted to put his trust in God, and that is what he believed. So. Did he say that? And you said he said that numerous times, or you offered him the option? He answered me the same response every time I asked him, and there's probably at least 4 times that I've asked him that.
During that time, that last 2 to 3 hours there, were you able to communicate with Neil?
Yeah.
Did he ask to go to a hospital, to a doctor?
No.
Was there an offer made by you or Jeff to, like you had done earlier, to?
No.
And why not?
I didn't want to. I wanted to honor his wishes, and I didn't want to just hound him about it. And I had actually came in here and laid down for a while until the last few minutes, so.
Okay. So you did not call 911?
No.
Did anyone else?
No, I don't believe so.
Would there have been a discussion that you might have been privy to of anybody who was talking about calling 911?
Everyone knew Neil's wishes, our whole family did, so.
Okay. So you were not present when Neil actually passed away?
I was, just a short time before.
Was he speaking before he passed?
No.
Was he, what kind of...
He was quiet and...
Did he appear to be unconscious, or was he responsive?
I know he had been responsive. I can't speak for the last, what happened.
Right.
He was quiet the last, it was maybe a minute or two.
Norma Beagley, Beagley.
Mrs. Beagley, how are you related to Jeffrey Beagley?
I'm Jeff's mother.
And so Marci is your daughter-in-law, is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yes.
And Neil was your grandson,
Yes.
correct? What's your recollection of the reason that they were there at your house?
He had the flu, and he was wanted to come to my house because it was more comfortable.
He
'Cause
meaning Neil?
Neil.
Had that ever happened before?
Well, they'd never lived in trailer houses before.
Okay. Well, so the answer is no, this had never
No,
happened before?
yeah,
Okay. And from the photographs, it appears, and in this initial time, where was it that Neil actually stayed when he was at your house?
Stayed
Where was he sleeping?
in the bedroom.
Okay, in your bedroom?
Yes.
Okay, where did you sleep?
I was sleeping, well, since I only had 2 bedrooms, we had we had blow-up beds, and in the living room I had a lounge chair in there.
Okay, so you were sleeping in a lounge chair in the living room?
Well, not always.
Well, sometimes?
Yes.
And one of the questions had to do with the form of faith healing that was involved.
Object to leading question and...
That's right. Let me rephrase it.
Okay.
Do you remember, rather than getting into what you said, but do you remember whether or not there was faith healing involved in Neil's condition prior to his death?
Yes.
And did you participate in that?
Yes.
And by participating, what did you actually do? What did you do?
What did I do?
Yeah.
Prayed.
Prayed. Were you involved in the laying on of hands?
Well, yes, that's what you do when you lay hands on, you pray.
Okay, well, you can pray without laying hands. I don't want to cut too fine of a point, but some people pray, some people lay on hands while they're praying. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
When did that happen?
I don't remember exactly. I don't remember exactly.
Well, do you remember telling Detective Webb that it began in the morning?
Well, early that day.
Okay,
Yes.
so there was
Yes.
one time in the morning,
Yes.
right? Do you have a recollection if there was a time later on, maybe 4 o'clock later in the afternoon, just before Neil's death?
No, I don't. But the day he died, I know we laid hands on him that day. He just wasn't feeling good.
Okay, is that your assessment even today, that up until and including his death, he just wasn't feeling good?
Yes.
Is that pretty much it?
Yes.
Okay. From your end, there was nothing unusual about his condition, even at the time that he died?
No.
And did everyone in your home, as part of the belief of faith healing, part of it was not to avail themselves of medical treatment,
Yes.
and including yourself?
Yes.
Have you ever been to a doctor?
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
I was at a doctor once.
So you went to a doctor?
Well, I didn't really. Well, I had a test to see if I was diabetic.
Have you ever had any surgeries or removal
No.
of anything?
No.
Moles or anything like that?
No. Oh, well, moles. Yes.
Okay, who did that?
That was years and years ago. I
Is
don't
that a doctor
remember.
that did that?
No. No, it wasn't a doctor. It was when I was young.
And would you say that you had a close relationship with Neil?
Yes.
And you talk about things?
He was a very endearing child. He was very serious and very capable. He was a very loving, caring, helpful child, and he was a joy to be around. He was a joy to have, and to spend time with. He was a very pleasant child, and
And do you recall him ever being sick like he was in March of 2008 prior to
No, no,
that? Anything remotely similar to that?
no.
And he got sick a second time, right? Yes?
Well, I don't know as I would say he got sick a second time. He just seemed like after he had the flu, it seemed like it just was sort of, couldn't get clear over it.
Holly K. Martinez, Martinez.
Okay. Good afternoon, Ms. Martinez. Tell me, how are you related to Jeff Beagley?
And so Jeff is my first cousin.
Okay. And in growing up, was your family close with Jeff and Steve Beagley and their mother and father, Norma, and I believe her husband's name was Dean, is that correct?
Yeah.
Would you describe your relationship with the Beagleys as a close one growing up as a child?
Yes.
And where did your family live during this time?
210 East Dartmouth in Gladstone.
Okay. And would you spend holidays together?
Yes, we'd spend all the holidays together and family birthday parties and other get-togethers. And at Sundays at church, and on Thursdays at church too.
All right.
See each other.
And you mentioned church. Were you raised as a member of the Followers of Christ Church?
Relevance.
Objections overruled.
Have you heard on that, Judge?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and have you step into the jury room for just a few moments here. We'll take up a legal matter here, and then we'll bring you back in here.
I object strongly to this witness opening up some character, her bad feelings regarding the church. I don't see that it's relevant to any issue in this case.
Okay, well, I mean, the problem, it would probably been helpful had we, may raise this in anticipation, but, I mean, the only current question that's on the floor here is just whether or not she was raised in the Followers of Christ Church, and I mean, it seems to me that is not objectionable.
Well, I object to any foray into the issue of why she left the church. And, the defense has been very careful, given the court's admonitions regarding opening doors, not to do that, and it's not relevant.
Well, I mean, what I understand Mr. Migrant to be telling us is that he's not going into any of the reasons here or any of her complaints about or misgivings about the church, but that I gather from what he said is that she has left the church, and then without expansion, as I understand it, that she and Ms. Beagley had a specific conversation. And I think if that's what we're limiting this to, I mean, it doesn't seem to me that we have the issue that you're anticipating.
At some point, did you make a choice to leave the church?
Yes, I left in 2003.
All right. And have you had any, before you left the church, do you recall having a specific conversation with Marci about Neil's health?
Yeah, we were at my sister's house in the summer at a family function, and there was a group of the younger women sitting together, and Marci asked us if we had ever heard of a child not being able to go to the bathroom. And I thought I could be helpful because my son, who's the same age as Neil, when he was a baby, he was really constipated. So at first I thought I was going to be really helpful to talk about the subject. And then somebody asked, was it constipation or what? And Marci clarified and said it was no problem going to the bathroom. Somebody asked if it was painful, and she said that it was.
Was there any further discussion about that topic of conversation after that?
Not that I recall. As far, I don't think anybody had any advice or anything.
Clifford Nelson, Nelson.
Dr. Nelson, what's your job?
I'm a deputy state medical examiner for the state of Oregon.
And can you explain to the jurors what your job responsibilities are?
My main job responsibility is to oversee and conduct death investigations. And for the medical examiner's office, this would be basically on anybody who dies outside of medical care. During medical school, I took an extra year and did a pathology sub-fellowship. Graduated medical school in 1989 and went directly into the combined anatomic and clinical pathology residency program. Clinical pathology is the area of pathology that deals with what people usually think of as wet laboratory medicine. Things like chemistry, microbiology, blood banking, serology, immunology, toxicology. And anatomic pathology deals with looking at tissues primarily. Could be anything from doing autopsies on people who die in a hospital situation to looking at specimens coming back from surgery, looking at biopsy specimens or cytologies to see if there's evidence of disease in those specimens. I finished both of that combined residency program in 1993 and then went to Atlanta, Georgia to do a fellowship in forensic pathology with the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office. I had taken my boards for all the different areas of pathology, anatomic, clinical, and forensic pathology, and was certified in all of those by 1994.
When you say an external examination, can you just very briefly show what's the difference between those two?
Yeah, an external examination is basically a complete head-to-toe overview of the person, looking for evidence externally of natural disease or trauma, and also usually involves drawing blood, urine, and sometimes fluid from the eye, which we call vitreous, to see if there are any chemical imbalances or any drugs in somebody's system. The difference between that and a autopsy or a full autopsy is full autopsy then goes on to open up the body, examine all the internal organs, as well as examining the brain.
People dying all the time, you don't do autopsies all the time. Give them just kind of an idea, an overview of, well, when is it when there's an autopsy that's actually performed?
Okay. Anybody who dies outside of medical care, the people that are going to get an autopsy is a case where we've looked into the background of the person. There's nothing in their history, their past medical history, the circumstances surrounding the death that allows us to know why that person died. And so basically it's, we've done as much things besides an autopsy as we can do to determine why the person died, and we still don't know. And so that person then is going to come in and be examined to figure out why they died.
Can you explain why it was that Neil Beagley's case would have been a case that would have required an autopsy?
With no known medical conditions or traumatic events that should have been expected to cause him to die.
And did that include an examination of any history, of any medical history? Was there any prior documented or communicated medical history that you could have relied upon in making that determination?
There was no medical history.
In Neil's case, go ahead and explain then what you learned from your examination on his internal examination.
Well, the first thing that I saw was an incredible amount of fluid that had built up both in his tissues as well as in any fluid spaces in the body. So his abdominal cavity was full of fluid. A large amount of fluid surrounding both lungs. Fluid surrounding the heart. Fluid basically oozing out of the tissues, any place that I would cut across. And once that was removed and we could see beyond that, it was obvious that his lungs were very full and boggy and full of fluid. His heart was enlarged. His kidneys were big and cystic, and that his bladder was hugely dilated, along with both of his ureters.
Especially emphasize those that you observe to be important or relevant in your ultimate decision about why Neil died.
Well, ultimately everything as far as the problems that Neil was undergoing were a result of a blockage at the outlet of his bladder. Urine basically couldn't get past this blockage. It dilates the bladder, backs up into the ureters, which...
Now, by dilate, just want to make sure with the language.
Basically stretches it out and turns it into a big sac containing about 800 milliliters, or not quite a quart, in the bladder itself, and then each of the ureters, which is the tube that basically connect on each side, which connects the kidney with the bladder, were very dilated. Normally, they are maybe half the diameter of this part of the microphone. In Neil's case, they were probably about this big in diameter, and each one of the ureters contained an estimated 200 milliliters, or about a fifth of a liter. In a normal case, somebody this size, I might be able to squeeze 3 to 4 milliliters out.
Would you consider what's going on here to have been something, maybe I've asked this already, but it was building over time then? Is that an accurate assessment of what you're seeing here?
Everything that I see here is not something that happened within a day or two. This is a result of something that's been going on for, in his case, years.
It's Patrick Sean O'Halloran, O''Hollaren.
And Dr. O'Halloran, if you could please tell us who you are and how you're employed.
I'm the Director of Pediatric Urology for Manual Children's Hospital in Portland, and I've been doing that since 1994.
And why did you choose the specific area of urology?
Well, I've always loved working with children, and I knew when I got into medical school and started doing rotations in internal medicine and surgery, the two big divisions in medicine were operative and non-operative, that I knew that my forte was going to be in surgical management of issues. And then when I did a urology rotation, I realized that I loved the types of problems that were involved in urology, and so I took my love of working with children, surgery, urology, and put it together into pediatric urology, and it fell into place. Now, in that fellowship, there may be a single-year fellowship where it's all clinical work. In other words, directly dealing with patients and doing surgeries and taking care of sick kids in terms of the genitourinary tract. But some programs have both a year which is mostly research involved with that organ system, and with some clinical work, and then the second year diving into the full clinical work. I chose one that involved the entire gamut. So I think it's very important to have an appreciation for what goes on in research, right down to genetic research and the microbiology, and to be able to understand what researchers do, but then get back into what I thought was my true calling, and that was directly taking care of children.
Now, how is this condition of posterior urethral valves, is this unique to males?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
In the development of the female urethra, they don't have the same juncture of the urethra that hooks up with the prostatic portion and the bladder portion that leads to a problem with the obstruction. Just like I explained the problem up at the UPJ obstruction, that's where tubes come together and the opening inside the tube never fully developed and you can get an obstruction there. It's the same idea in the male, but the female urethra doesn't have that issue. They just have the one sphincter and the short urethra, so they don't have this junction of two urethras where there can be a problem with that juncture.
Frequently, how are these posterior urethral valves detected? You spoke to it a little bit earlier, but I'd like to have you tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, in the vast majority of cases, it's a prenatal ultrasound that picks this up, which essentially all people in developed countries get a prenatal ultrasound at some point. I mean, even if you're 6 months pregnant and walk in homeless and walk into an emergency room, you say you don't feel good. If you're 6 months pregnant, you get a prenatal ultrasound. I mean, people get prenatal ultrasounds, and what happens is that this is one of the most common things that we pick up in a prenatal ultrasound in terms of abnormalities. Is they specifically look at the amount of fluid that the baby's floating in, which is a factor of how well the urinary tract system is working. But they also look at the urinary tract itself to see if there's any dilation of the tract. And that's one of the things that's picked up on a prenatal ultrasound. And so typically, in the vast majority of cases, my typical patient first contact would be a pregnant woman, often at 20, 25 weeks. And my patient hasn't been born yet, but we're already making plans on how to deal with this after the baby's born. So that's the typical scenario.
And would you say that what percentage would you estimate that you of these posterior urethral valves that you see in utero?
They're picked up in utero, a vast majority. I think probably in my experience, probably upwards more than 90%, 95% are picked up, at least 95% I would say, are picked up prenatally.
Janice Ophoven, Ophoven. My educational background is I'm a medical doctor. I made a decision early in my career to make a contribution to the body of knowledge about injuries in children, and in preparation for that I went to medical school. I did a residency in pediatrics at the University of Minnesota. I made arrangements with the pediatrics department and the pathology department to combine the training so that I could also get training as a pediatric pathologist. As such, I did a 4-year residency in pathology after I did pediatrics. I did a pediatric pathology fellowship, which is a study of disease and injury and tissue and laboratory specimens in children at the Minneapolis Children's Hospital. Following that, I finished my training with a qualification for board certification in forensic pathology, which is the analysis of injuries and disease for purposes of interpreting how and under what circumstances the injury or disease came to cause symptoms or death. I finished all of that in 1980 and proceeded to practice or begin my practice of pediatric forensic pathology, which I have done for the last 30 years. Throughout my career, I've focused on understanding, teaching, and investigating cases of injuries or unexpected death in children, and have provided investigative support for both prosecution, law enforcement, as well as defense cases, defense counsel.
From a forensic pathologist standpoint, or a person with your pediatric background, is it possible to tell if any specific part of Neil Beagley's urinary system was compromised at a specific time?
No, based on my knowledge of conditions and the frequency of the kinds of conditions that occur, this is a pretty typical example of a case of congenital anomaly of the urethra, and it is entirely appropriate to say that this is a congenital condition that did not present itself to attention until adolescence. As most of us are aware, this condition is unique to boys, and at the time they hit puberty, they frequently may have been compensated with their problem, and then what they call kidney survival what may have been a surviving kidney up till the time of adolescence is no longer a surviving kidney because of the pressures of growth, the perhaps alterations in hormones and so forth. Children who have been stable and growing may suddenly deteriorate. The kidney may suddenly deteriorate at the time of adolescence. This is well recognized. It's not common, but it's well recognized. And it occurs in people who do get medical care.
Is that right?
It was all dealing with children, sir, but I wasn't looking in their ears with an otoscope.
And when was the last time you did that?
In the 70s.
Okay, so 70 when?
76, 77.
So we're talking 34 years ago was the last time you actually treated a child?
As a pediatrician, yes.
Okay. And you're not and never have been board certified as a pediatrician, is that right?
No, I didn't sit for the boards on purpose.
And most of your work is doing just like what you're doing here, isn't it, in private consultation?
No, the way you're characterizing is not true. What I basically made a decision to do 30 years ago is study and contribute to the body of knowledge on injuries in children. The way to do that, of course, is to evaluate and then participate in the investigation of injuries in children. Because there's only about 10 of us in the world that have chosen this particular area of interest, I, over time, have become involved in a lot of cases, not only here in the United States, but in the UK, participating in the evaluation of unique cases or cases where there appears to be some differences of opinion about how the child got injured or died. And that is simply where I've ended up. It's not I went to medical school and did 9 years of training so that I could come and testify in courtrooms. The price I pay for participating in the investigation of injuries in children is that every now and then I have to come and do this.
Well, it's a little bit more often than every now and then, isn't it, Doctor?
Well, I think sometimes it was, I think one year I testified maybe 40 times and other years 2 or 3 times. But to be very honest, if I didn't ever have to do this, it'd be fine with me. The real point is looking at the cases, bringing my knowledge and experience to the case, helping law enforcement and others to understand what the science shows, and being prepared to explain it to a jury if I'm asked to do so. And I'm not ashamed of that.
I didn't imply that you should be ashamed of it. I just want to clarify where your work is being done.
Sure. It's absolutely true that the majority of cases that I review and investigate over the last 5 to 6 years are exclusively for defendants.
Well, the majority is exclusively, what do you mean by that?
I'm sorry, I don't want to, I really am not trying to do semantic shenanigans here.
Okay.
I take cases, whoever wants to know, and whoever is asking me is going to get the same opinion. It doesn't matter who asks me. And in the last 5 years, the majority of people who have asked me to do, all of the people who have asked me to testify in the last 4 to 5 years have been for defense attorneys. It doesn't affect my opinion.
Well, how about, let's go to 2007 then. In 2007, you had 31 cases, and there were 31 cases that you testified for the defense, and there were 0 for the prosecution. Does that make sense to you, or does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Sounds about right. And then in 2006, there were 23 cases, and you testified 22 times for the defense and once for the prosecution. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And that one time was that in Australia? Is that right?
It was a serial killer in Australia that I was asked to participate in and help with the investigation. So it was actually 5 deaths.
Okay, so excluding one time you testified in Australia, the last 3 years you testified 65 times for the defense and none for the prosecution. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And then that goes on, doesn't it? And in those cases, were they, had they been unattended in terms of no medical treatment?
I don't know what you mean by unattended.
Well, how about medical treatment? Were those kids getting medical treatment?
They had been to a doctor prior to the autopsy, yes.
Okay, so you have not done any autopsies on a child with Neil's situation that died from chronic renal failure and had not seen a doctor. Neil's is the only example of that, isn't it?
That's correct.
Mr. Lewis, would you tell the jury how you are employed?
And Your Honor, before I start answering questions, myself and part of all of DHS staff are required to read a statement to the court.
I'm going to tell you that you're going to be ordered to reply to the questions that are asked of you concerning the issues in your contact with the issues related to Neil Beagley.
Okay, thank you. So go ahead and repeat the question.
Would you tell the jury how you're employed, please?
I work for the State of Oregon Department of Human Services as a Child Protective Service worker. So but I've been with the agency for what will be a total of 9 years, beginning March 15th of this year.
Okay, and what is the Department of Human Services?
It's a state government agency, and the component that I work at is child welfare, which is a branch of the Department of Human Services, and that also consists of Social Security, self-sufficiency, food stamps, and so forth.
And then I assume you've got more than one case.
Correct.
So, like, well, what would your caseload be like?
Well, I mean, right now I've got about 40 cases. Average, 12 a month of new cases.
Let's talk about your first contact with the Beagley family, and that was based upon this anonymous report. Didn't that person identify themselves as a relative?
Yes.
Okay, so they've identified, we don't know who it is, but they said anyway that it's a relative, correct? Okay. And you ended up out at the residence outside of Oregon City then. Isn't that where that first interview took place on the 17th of March, correct? That's the first time you actually had, as you said, eyes on for either of the kids, or first time you met Jeff and Marci Beagley. Is that right? Do I have all that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned something about that you were trying to get yourself informed. You hadn't dealt with the case involving followers, and so you were trying to educate yourself a little bit about what some of the beliefs were. Is that correct?
Correct.
And was it your understanding that the followers did not believe in providing medical care?
I'll object to that, Judge.
I'll overrule the objection.
Yes.
And that was even before you got there, is that right?
Correct.
And when you got there, there were actually some statements that were made to you by the Beagleys, by Mr. and Mrs. Beagley, that in fact confirmed that, wasn't there?
Correct.
Those were their statements, not your own personal views or anything else. They told you that, didn't they?
Correct.
You started out saying, I next spoke to Neil. And you ended up, you kind of went through the litany of things where you're trying to make sure this kid is safe, just like you're taught, right?
Right.
And you're focusing in this case on the concern that the parents aren't providing appropriate medical care, aren't you?
Right.
And so you wanted to ask about, in addition to other things, you wanted to ask him about what happens when he's sick, right?
Right.
And he told you, in your asking, he told you that he had previously, and did this imply when he was, a little kid, years ago, that kind of thing, that he had had the flu and colds, right? That's what he told you.
Correct.
So he was reporting that previous in his life, throughout his life, he had previously had the flu and colds. And then he told you the same thing, didn't he? He told you that his parents would anoint him when he was sick or has the flu. That's all he said about what they would do, wasn't it?
That's correct.
He never said, well, in addition to that, they do a laying on of hands when I have the flu. He didn't say that, did he?
No, he didn't.
Did he say that his mom and dad would call and request other people to come over, and that they would get relatives and friends and they would all gather around and lay on hands when he had the flu in the past?
No.
Now, the next report was, now what is that? Then by the time you got out and saw them, it would have been April 2nd when you actually got to them, is that correct?
Correct.
So what are we talking about? It was the 17th, so that's about 2 weeks then, right?
Yes.
And again, you report that it was an anonymous caller, but it was actually identified not just as a relative, but it was an aunt at this point that was calling.
Correct.
And the aunt was concerned that that Neil might die based upon his sickness, right?
Correct.
When you first went out to the house, it took you a while to figure out where they were, didn't it?
Yes.
Because they weren't at the house out in Oregon City, right?
Right.
And in fact, the reporter, the referral person, said that they might not be there. They were moving around, because that's what they said, wasn't it?
Right.
And in fact, they had been moving around, hadn't they?
Yes, they had moved.
And so, did you just show up at the residence of Norma Beagley's over in Gladstone?
Yes.
You didn't call in advance?
No.
And when Norma, did you just knock on the door?
I did.
And what did she do when she came to the door?
She opened up the door and looked at me.
And what did you say?
Said, I'm Jeff Lewis from DHS, looking for Neil or Jeff.
And what did she do?
Just stood there.
Did she say they weren't here?
She didn't say anything.
Did she say they were there?
She didn't say anything. Norma was standing in front of the door. Jeff walked from behind Norma's left across to her right. I said, Jeff,
Did he come
came and he stood behind Norma for a little bit.
Okay. So he actually came to the door, though?
Yes.
Okay. So at least Mr. Beagley was cooperative in terms of coming to the door when you were there?
Yes.
All right. Now, his first response wasn't it that he had been, didn't he claim that he had actually been advised by a lawyer not to talk to you?
Yes.
It wasn't that he said, I want to talk to a lawyer, was it?
Correct.
It wasn't that, let me call and see if I can consult with a lawyer, right?
Right.
He told you that he had already been advised by a lawyer
Yes.
not to do anything.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
So let's jump ahead to the second, the first. Was Marci Beagley there? You saw Norma Beagley, and you talked to Jeff Beagley.
Right.
Did you see Marci Beagley?
No.
And did you see Neil at that time?
No.
Okay. So now let's move ahead to the second. And you went in and talked to him at that point in time, right? Well, you got there, you ended up getting access at the Gladstone house, right?
Right, on the second.
On the second. Now, when you talked to him, did it appear that he was kind of ready for you? I mean, he was there ready and waiting for you when you arrived?
Yes.
There was an agreed upon time when you were going to be there?
Well, I called ahead and said that I was on my way.
Okay, and so they knew that you were going to be there, so he wasn't laying in bed
Right.
or anything like that. He was dressed, right?
Right.
And they had ample time to let him know, and Neil, it wasn't like you just dropped in, hey, we want to see how Neil's doing, let us come in right now. It wasn't like that at all, was it?
Correct.
As it might have been the previous day, right?
Right.
The previous day, there was no warning, was there?
Right.
You came out and explained to them, Mr. and Mrs. Beagley, the result of your conversation with Neil that had just been conducted just moments before. Is that right?
Yes.
And are you sitting down, or are you standing up, or do you remember?
We're standing up.
You're standing up, so it's like you're getting ready to go kind of a thing? Wasn't like you had to sit down, a lengthy conversation about this?
Right.
And how long from the time you came out did this conversation with Jeff and Marci Beagley last before you left?
It wasn't very long.
5 minutes?
5 minutes, sure.
Now, you talked to them about this case going to court, right?
Right.
Because it involved the possibility that a judge was going to have to make a decision about what was going to happen to Neil. That was what you were talking to them about, wasn't it?
Right.
So as you're talking, well, I've talked to Neil, but this case, because of your beliefs, may end up in front of a judge, right?
Correct.
Are you clear that that was the context in which this conversation happened?
Yes, the idea was what would happen next. Would we have to go to court?
Okay, and so it was clear, at least in your opinion, that you communicated that the person with the final word was going to be a judge if it went to court. Is that right?
Correct.
If the condition that Neil was in was different than what you actually observed, your result, your judgment, your decision could have been quite different. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yes.
And let me just run through for you then. If when you arrived, whether it was April 2nd or let's say you're called again in June, whatever, but that the person that you see, and Neil had actually been laying in bed, and let me just kind of run down a scenario for you. If he had been laying in bed and either couldn't or wouldn't get out of bed, and if it was clear, both from observations and descriptions by the parents, that Neil had been very tired, and that he had little or no appetite, and that he complained of pain, if the parents both reported that he was much worse on the day that you saw him than the day before, your decision about what to do would have been very different, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And in fact, you would have acted at that time to do something to protect Neil, wouldn't you?
Correct.
And you had a range of options, didn't you, as far as what you could have done, and it might have included calling 911. Is that right?
That's right.
Is that within the realm of possibility, considering the conditions that I've just read, that you might call 911?
Yes.
Was it also within the realm of possibility, based on these conditions, not just possibility, but calling the police to take him into protective custody?
Yes.
Immediately have scheduled an emergency hearing in front of a judge about the authority to intervene in this kid's behalf.
Correct.
Is that kind of the range of what you would have done?
Yes, that's what I'm capable of doing.
And based upon the description of what we've just given, would you have done one of those? You would have done something, wouldn't you?
Yes.
And would you have done that even though Neil said, I don't want to go to a doctor?
Yes.
And would you have done that even though the parents say, my son doesn't want to go to a doctor and we don't want him to go to a doctor if he doesn't want to go to a doctor?
Yes.
You would have acted anyway if he had appeared the way I've just described. Is that correct?
Correct.
In the matter of State of Oregon plaintiff versus Jeffrey Dean Beagley, defendant, the verdict form reads, we, the jury, being duly impaneled and sworn in the above entitled court and cause, hereby find the defendant guilty of the charge of criminally negligent homicide as alleged in the indictment. Dated the 2nd day of February 2010. In the case of State of Oregon plaintiff versus Marci Beagley, defendant, the verdict form reads as follows. We, the jury, being duly impaneled and sworn in the above entitled court and cause, do hereby find the defendant guilty of the charge of criminally negligent homicide as alleged in the indictment. Dated the 2nd day of February 2010.